you think you're smart enough to have it not happen to you. But I think what's good, and I think how I'm proud of the approach that we had, was like we were smart enough to ask the questions and say no and say, it feels too fishy. Maybe we could have gotten it, without having a couple of the emails back and forth. But, I'd rather be safe than sorry on something like that.
Hello, and welcome to Financials Podcast Future Rich. I am Barbara Ginty, and I am also a CFP, which is a Certified Financial Planner. And I'm very excited to bring you my guest today, Ashley of Higher Innovation. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I think we're going to surprise our listeners with what we're talking about, but why don't you first give our listeners a little introduction of who you are and your company and what you're working on.
Yeah, so Higher Innovation is a U.S. manufacturing company. We are based in just north of Austin, Texas, in Pflugerville, and we are creating different types of technology hardware products in the accessibility space for plant medicine. So we have a personal portable air purifier, we have a smart grinder, all sorts of fun technology and hardware products.
Exciting. And how long have you been doing this?
We started the company in 2022, and then we had a couple years of R&D and have been selling product for the past year.
Amazing. So we bring a lot of female founders on. We talk about starting businesses. It's something our listeners are always interested in, side hustles and turning those into full-fledged businesses. But we also have a very interesting twist on this today because, as I've talked a lot about on the podcast and have people who've come on the podcast, including journalists, to talk about financial crimes and financial scams. And I was unaware that they specifically target startup companies.
It's fun.
So just because you don't have enough battles as a female founder with getting a company off the ground, you have to worry about being targeted from a financial crime standpoint, or scam is what I'll say. So why don't you kind of walk us through, this happened to you, and I thought this would be a great episode for any of our listeners out there, and you are highly educated and very savvy, and it's scary how sophisticated it's gotten. I've said that before, but this was one I had not heard of previously and had not seen written about either as well.
Yeah. So I think what's really challenging is when you're starting a company, no matter what industry you're in, getting financing is challenging. And so outside of having personal, worth that you can put into the business, you're really limited regardless of industry on getting an SBA loan or just a traditional bank loan or line of credit. A lot of times it's just like credit cards. Or if you've got family and friends that can loan you money, or you're able to work on your business as a side hustle while you have a full-time job. And so kind of what we've seen is, time and time again, you get all these people reaching out saying, hey, I can give you I can invest $1 million into your company. And you're like, well, you don't know me. How did you find me? That sounds great. We are fundraising. So maybe my deck floated somewhere like in your realm. But really, it's always, if it's too easy and too good to be true, then it's too good to be true. And luckily for us, we have a good network where we haven't fallen for the scam and that we've like wired the money, but like you can get far enough down the path where you're like talking to these people and you're like, what is going on? So generally what happens is it's just an email or a LinkedIn message. And I think the LinkedIn is where it starts to get a little bit crazier because it feels more real, right? And so they're like, hey, love what you're doing. Saw you were connected to so-and-so on LinkedIn, or you commented on this post. And then they're like, we do investments through this third-party group. And then, but send us your deck. Here's our term sheets. And it's just gotten really kind of crazy. And it's a little bit of a time waste. But when you're a startup and you're trying to get funding and you need that runway and you don't want to take out another credit card, or you don't want to tap friends and family, trying to find like non-traditional lines of funding is something that I think every founder is going through.
It's often with somebody you don't know who's been introduced to you. So that's normally how it works, having done a bit of investing on my own.
Yeah.
It's like this person introduces you to this person that introduces you to this person. And so a lot of the credibility, right, comes from that you have this commonality somewhere down the line, but it could be 3 people removed.
Exactly. And that's what's been, I think, a little bit frustrating when going through the process, because like I said, like we at Higher Innovation are fundraising. So our deck has been out there. We've talked to so many people. We've attended so many conferences. And so it's easy to be like, well, maybe I did meet this person at a conference, because it's not hard for them to kind of like see where you are based on, I'm not an avid LinkedIn poster. I'm not like, had a great time at this conference, but I'll comment and I'll interact, and they can track that and be like, hey, we chatted in Chicago. And it's like, maybe we did chat in Chicago. I met so many people, and they get enough information where then they're like, okay, well, send me your deck. Here's our term sheet. And here's how we would want to move forward through the diligence process. But I think there's been some like kind of key flags. But it's just crazy how personalized it's gotten at this time.
And how sophisticated. So why don't you tell us like who contacted you? They have a profile picture. They have hundreds or thousands of followers. Yeah. They have a full resume. You did a video call with the person who matches the picture on LinkedIn. I think that's the part that people don't get, right? Yeah. Because I think the first question I got when I was talking about this with someone else, when we decided like we should make this an episode, was, well, it wasn't a video call. And I was like, no, it was a video call. And the person on the video call matched all the pictures that were online with LinkedIn. So then it's like, and when you're in it, which I thought you said, which is very interesting, we'll circle back to this, but you don't know it's a scam until after.
Right.
There's no way to know that this isn't just your lucky break, because you often hear on all, like, I Love My First Million, all these other podcasts that talk to founders, where they say, I just got really lucky, right? Like, I was out there doing the hard work, but I also got lucky. And so there's part of you being like, is this our lucky break that this person found our deck and wants to invest? And so there's always that part of you waiting for that, I don't know, that trajectory, right, to turn. You're doing all the work, you're doing everything right, and you just like need a lucky break, And so I think that's also what they're preying on with the startup world. But yeah, tell us about the particular individual and how it was a video call, the pictures matched, the LinkedIn profile was there, the resume was there.
Yeah, so I got an email from this guy named John Pirro, Pirro, and he had just said, hey, investing via Morgan Corporation in THG. And he said, there's a group called the Hashimi Group that he works on all of his deals with, who they recommend that he reach out to us because we fit kind of the portfolio of products that he's interested in investing in. And so it's this super long email that we get. And what's kind of crazy about the email, which was my first red flag, but I started doing the diligence, is it's like this guy's putting his credibility into the email. So he's attaching a list of patents that he has, that he's a part of, or that he owns. He's listing all of these articles that he's written. He's putting these links to this Forbes article about the guy who owns this like THG group, right? So there's all of this stuff. And at first glance, you're like, oh, that saves me, a Google search. But also you're like, well, that's a lot of information. I get that that's your template, but it was a little bit of an overshare. We've talked to enough investors to know that like, this feels like a little heavy handed. And so I was like, great, how did you find out about us? How did THG find out about us? And it's like, oh, their diligence team's just doing research. They're constantly finding companies. And then we're going through the process. He wants our deck. I'm like, I'm not sending you anything until we have a call. My husband, who's the co-founder of our company as well, he and I get on a call with this guy. We have a list of questions. It's like a 15-minute call, a video call. Yes, a video call. And you can tell, and I get AI is like very sophisticated and you can like fake it, but we were asking pretty pointed questions and very specific questions to our product and our industry that I know it was a real human on the other end of that line. And it was a productive call. I mean, says all the right things, gives, how he, saying he sold a business and that's how he's liquid and he does X number of investments a year, and going through all of this process. And then, every single time it's like, okay, well, everything is going to go through THG. This third party is going to be responsible for all of the diligence, and they're going to turn over 2,000 pages of diligence. And that was a little bit of a red flag for me as well, because I was like, well, okay, I've fundraised before. I've done this. That's a lot of diligence, especially on a company as young as we are. Even if you do the industry competitive analysis and you do 2,000 pages is a lot. Like everything felt really overkill with the conversation. So he then is like, okay, sign like our doc and wire money. I was like, well, what are the terms? That was something that we kept coming back to. It's like, you're saying you're going to give us $500,000 to $750,000 for what? Is it a convertible note? Is it straight equity? Are you wanting to do a safe? What are the terms? What are you valuing our company at? We didn't share any of that information. We never turned over our deck so he could see it. And so he's like, whatever you want it to be, we're flexible. And I was like, well, no,
nobody's usually flexible.
It's called a negotiation, right? Like that's always what happens. Like investors think your company is valued too high. You're going back and forth with them. And so I finally was like, okay, well, here's what we would want it. He was like, great, send me your term sheet and I'll sign it. So we send a term sheet. He signs the term sheet, but everything was okay. The first deal was wire $5,000 to $10,000 to this third party in India, the THG group. And then he will give us $60,000. And then once he gives us $60,000 to pay for the diligence, then we have to wire back $45,000 to cover our part of the diligence. And then we get the tranche if he decides to move forward post diligence. And I kept being like, well, we're a small business. Like we need that money, right? Like we need working capital. We have inventory and stuff that we need to buy. So for us, like I could spend the money pretty quickly and that's what we need it for. That's why we're having these conversations. It's not to say, give me 60, I give you 45 after I paid you 10. And so that's where it's like, he wouldn't budge. So then he's like, well, I'll cover 50, you pay 2, but I'm going to give you a lower total investment amount. And I was like, okay, well, how long is that going to take? And he was like, 5 days or something like that. And I was like, how are you going to turn on 2,000 pages? Why is whose hourly rate is this? I'm in the wrong industry, right? And so
yeah.
Then I was like, well, he's like, just pay like $2,000. And I was like, I'm not going to pay $2,000. I was like, if you want to invest, then you can just take that out of the tranche, right? And we'll take it at a higher percentage, but we're not going to wire you outside money. And I think what was making me go a little bit crazy in these conversations was we had a group from the UAE reach out right when we started the business, probably after our first trade show. But you do one quick Google and all over Reddit, it's like, you're scammed, whatever. And we had talked to them too, and that was a real person. And they had a guy that was listed on the Saudi prince, their governing financial website is listed as a partner for this organization. But you do one Google on them and everyone's like scam. So I'm thinking the same thing, right? I'm Googling the THG group, but you get the Forbes stuff, you get this guy's Twitter profile. Same with the guy, this John guy. And nothing is coming up on Reddit and anything. I'm emailing my patent attorney to say hey, are these real patents? This investor is potentially interested. This is his credibility. And I'm like, she's like, what are you doing? But we ask her a lot of weird questions anyway. And I love her. But, I was like, we could never find anything. So to your point of maybe this is the lucky break. Because you talk to people and yeah, you just need that oomph. The number of people who are I love what you're doing. You have so much traction and momentum. You just need that oomph. You're okay, well, maybe this will be it. But when we talked, you were well, you're never going to be bullied by someone who wants to be an investor in your company. And I think that really stuck with me.
A lot of pressure.
Yeah, a lot of pressure.
Kind of what I said is, even though at the time when we had a call about it, and I said there's just, couldn't find anything. I ended up finding stuff on him later, but not initially, because if you do a quick Google search, it's very hard. I don't know how I was because I'm so pregnant, I'm up in the middle of the night. So at 3 a.m., I was really putting my detective hat on, and I was I need to find something on this guy. And I did find stuff eventually. Yeah. It was not easy to find. I think I got lucky finding it, but there was a thread on LinkedIn no one I'm connected to that said that this guy is a scam, and people have been scammed by him. But it wasn't really easy to find. It wasn't on Reddit, because Reddit's usually comes up a lot faster, or Google. It was nowhere. It was like on a random LinkedIn conversation that was public that I somehow stumbled upon literally in the middle of the night because I was up. So, but I think there was like a certain features of what they were asking for that are synonymous with a scam, which is you send me money to get money. So that's always a no-go, right? And so and then you went back and said, well, we're happy to accommodate your diligence. We're not going to pay for it, but we'll take an uneven amount of money. Because most of the time when you're investing in a company, you can't do $4.95. It's $500, $750. Right. It's not like $4.99. Like, I'm going to put $499. So you said, we'll accommodate the adjustment and allow for it without the whole number as an accommodation for your diligence request, but we're not sending you money. And then at one point there was a time requirement. Well, if you don't do this within 48 hours, that the price changes. And that's usually a sign of a scam, that they create this false sense of urgency where there isn't any. And normally, right, when you're getting an investor, they want to make sure, because now they're your partner in a sense, right? You're going to be corresponding and communicating, and they have either equity or debt in your business. They want to take their time and get to know you, and they're not going to say, well, if you don't do it in 24 hours, we're out, because that's not a collaborative relationship going forward.
That, and I think too, it was just one of those things where, it was too good to be true. And I think that they weren't asking, it's not like he was like, hey, it was too laissez-faire, right? Where it's like, I'm just going to give you the money for whatever. And it's like, well, that's crazy.
What is it being used for? Yeah.
What's it being used from? You're not asking on my, use of funds. You're not talking to me about, is it debt? Is it equity? What is the valuation? Like, all of just like the brass tacks of like how investments work just weren't there. And it felt very uneasy when it was just like too easy to be like, sign the term sheet. It's like, well, no, everybody has feedback. How did you get to the valuation that you're at? You've been selling product for a year. Why do you do this? How are your use of funds? What are you doing? Where are your growth numbers? Like, when you never ask for like a financial forecast or like a current, balance sheet, you're just kind of like, what are you doing? But again, some people I know people who've just been like, I liked them, so I gave them money. And you're like, okay, well, that's fun too. But I think it's that like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon can work. I think if you have that trusted, if you can track it to whatever that lead source is, whether it was, you did meet me at a conference and I sat and I talked to you, or you talked to a guy about me, you can trace that back. Right. And I think because we couldn't get that and it was too raw on top of everything else, we're like, it's too good to be true, unfortunately.
And it had those key elements, right? Like, send me money to get money.
Yeah.
Also the overshare, which is unique in the financial scam space, I would say, the overshare of, here are my patents. I think, and then the big red flag is when anyone puts an unvalid sense of urgency, right? You have to do this by this time. That's always where they're usually they've created a false sense of urgency. It is not a real sense of urgency. And when making big decisions, especially financial decisions, you should always err on the side of taking time, right? And not rushing into anything. So I just think it's very interesting because it was a video call. So like the pictures, everything matches. And the fact that they're going after startup, because that's not something that I put together. I studied the financial crimes after we had Charlotte on to talk about it, who was scammed, and wrote an article for The Cut about it. And then I looked at the FBI's website. They have a podcast about it. And startup financial scams are not mentioned anywhere.
Well, and I think that that's disappointing. And it's going to take somebody getting scammed and then being able to get it in a public way, probably, for it to go through. I think what these scammers are not taking into consideration is that, like, if you're a startup, you don't have just $5,000 laying around, because if you had $5,000 laying it around, you're putting it to use somewhere else. So that initial use of funds is like, regardless of how small it is, it's small enough that it makes an impact to your business, which is probably why I'm sure people have fallen for it, that there's not as many right now. But because we've made it so challenging for startups to get funding, that you do feel this like tension component to it, because how do you move forward with your business when you can't just go get a line of credit, or the traditional, just every lender that we've spoken to is just like, you don't have enough monthly recurring revenue. And a lot of this was before we were selling product. We were like, I'm doing R&D. I got to buy, machinery. I got to buy equipment. What do I do, to get to the point that I can sell the product? And everybody is just like, friends and family, or you need to take out credit cards, which that's a slippery slope in and of itself on the credit card thing. And if you're not at a point where you have that family to lean on, it's challenging. And I think where the startups get really vulnerable is because every day is so chaotic, in every moment, that you're like, you know what, $5,000, if I can get 500, maybe that's a risk that I can take. But then even if you're ghosted, they know, your routing number and your banking information, and what else can they do with it that you don't realize in the time if they're this sophisticated. So I think startups are just going to continue to get targeted. I mean, even this morning, I woke up to an email in my spam, because I always check my spam folder, and I have another person in there already being like, could you deal, what would it take how would your business grow if you got an extra $100,000? And it's like, these are not real things. And like, something has to be done about it across the board.
No, you're right. There's a vacuum of financing, especially for women founders, right? So women, I mean, women are less likely to get financing. Women-owned businesses are less likely to reach $1 million in revenue compared to their counterparts. And so I think the scammers, as we've talked about on the show before, have become so sophisticated, and they see that there's a vacuum in lending, right? And so they can target, because they prey on people specifically where they feel like there's a gap, right? So they prey on retirees because they know they have a lot of retirement assets, right? The romance scams, they prey on people who are lonely and maybe vulnerable. And I just had no idea they're preying on startups, because you need that financing and there isn't as much lending, right? And depending on the industry, there might be very little lending. And so they know that they can get an engaged potential person just by, saying, we've heard about your company and we're interested.
Yeah. And I think, LinkedIn, I think, is a wonderful place, and Twitter as well. But the challenge with those two platforms that I think makes it easy for these scammers to target companies is you'll have all of these larger funds or people posting being like, hey, I've got a list of everybody actively deploying capital, comment, funds, and then I'm going to send you the link. So then these people can just say, I'm going to follow these X number of funds, these people who are very active. And then every single person who's on there that comments that, to get this list, that's just a ripe target for them. It's so simple and it's so easy in LinkedIn, because you can just make a LinkedIn profile. You can connect with people. How many people are you just randomly connected with?
Yeah,
it's a lot of effort, but like you build that credibility so fast, because you can be like, oh, now I'm connected to with this guy, I wasn't connected to anybody. When you have that many followers, you're like, maybe that, or connections, it could be the case. But I think they've made it where startups are so vulnerable, and it's so public how vulnerable people are and how people are like wanting the money. The same thing happens on X. Hey, I've got people doing it. Go through, comment, whatever. And you're just like, thank you for the information. But it also opens you up to a level of vulnerability that I don't think we existed. Because I've been racking my head about like, how do I keep getting on these lists? And again, I'm not a public person on Twitter. I'll comment some things on Twitter. I never post on LinkedIn. I probably should be better at it. And then I saw like a list thing, and it was like, comment for this list of, investors. And I was like, that's how they're doing it. It's so simple. It's so simple. It's just right there. And I think it's just taking advantage of the companies, the people actually trying to help. And then you just get in a really bad cycle.
Yeah. And as you said, you don't know it's a scam until after, usually. And so using our best judgment, we would say 99% likely this is a scam. But we can't say for certain, because you didn't go through with it. You didn't you didn't lose money. So we think it's a scam. The other red flag. So, right. So the fact that you have to give money first, the sense of urgency created. I also think that there's usually an international component, right? And so the fact that this third party diligence wasn't domestically based was always concerning, because what they've proven with a lot of the financial crimes is certain countries are targeting America. And so the problem is there's really no recourse. And a wire, so for anyone listening, a wire is the same as essentially handing someone cash. You cannot get it back once the wire leaves. ACH is another version where you could stop it. In theory, you could potentially pull it back, but wire is essentially cash, and there's a lot you have to go through with a financial institution to execute a wire verifications, because if it is fraudulent, the second they hit send on the wire, it's gone. It's just like completely gone. And so that international component is an important feature, because they've proven that a lot of this money is leaving the United States and we're being targeted by certain other countries. And so that was interesting that it was like a non-US diligence firm. And then the other thing is, even though this person appeared to be residing in the United States, my gut instinct was like he wasn't. And so then once again, there's no recourse, because he's not in this country.
Yeah. It's maddening. It's just maddening. It makes, startups are hard enough, and like running your own business and trying to build something's hard enough. The financial aspect of it's already hard enough. Getting revenue is hard enough. And then you kind of like layer this on top of it when you are in the throes of fundraising, or you're in the throes of doing whatever you're doing, and you can kind of feel that optimism. You're like, maybe my tide is turning, but now it's like everything just has to have a thicker lens that it goes through. But what's disappointing is like, I luckily have people that I can call and be like, gut check me that am I crazy? Like, does this feel weird? And it's not a judgment. Like it's let me look, who am I connected with? Let me go and send me all the information, and they can be like, go, no go on it. Right. Or here's where I'm thinking, or ask these questions. And I think because I have that, I felt more confident to say, we're not going to move forward with it. I mean, another piece of the diligence, to your point of it being international, is, I was speaking with someone who works in finance and private equity. And so they do a ton of diligence. He's like, we sometimes make people pay for diligence. They wire us, we're the intermediary. But if it doesn't go through, we wire the money back. And your contract should be with this John guy. Your contract should not be with this third party group. So even
it's not domestically based, because you can't enforce something that's in India.
Right.
If there's a problem with a domestic based company and you have a contract here with our laws, with your residing in the United States, and let's say they're residing also in Texas, then you would go to court in Texas if there's a conflict with the contract. There's nothing you can do when the money leaves the country.
Right. And so I think that was just like, that was like another added layer. It's like, well, how's the diligence contract set up? Well, that doesn't make sense either. But again, I have people that I could call and ask those questions to and not feel judged. And I think that's something that I think is really important, because like, if you can't have someone that you can gut check or like talk about it and just be like, where are we? Because everything is crazy. And then you try to make that decision on your own, you likely will make the incorrect decision. Again, we didn't do it. So like, we may or may not have lost out on the money. I'd rather be safe than sorry on that. But you have to have those people that you can talk to, like, and just like a quick, hey, I need you to look at this. And it's a judgment-free zone. Even if you take the money, you're like, I made a mistake. It's like, okay, well, now we learned, and we move on from it. Or just be like, look out for these red flags, talk to this, ask this question. So I think without that, it just also lingers the process on. And that's like a time suck for everybody when that your time is already so limited, especially when you're a founder of a company.
Absolutely. But I think you bring up a really key point. And this is the other thing that they do with the financial scams, is they want to isolate you so that you're not getting a gut check. And I think it's super important to have people that you feel like you can always go to, whether it's a startup or any other type of financial crime, where you can say, this is what's happening. I don't want to be, because everyone doesn't want to be judged or shamed, right? And when you're in it and you're running a business and this is the 18th thing you have to get done today, you are rushing to get decisions made, right? Because you have to owning a business, you're making a lot of decisions every day. And so what I find sometimes is by the end of the day, I can't make any more decisions. Like I'm decisioned out and I'm not making, I want to do it first thing. And so to have those people around you that you can say, here's what's happening, who are not involved, who can give you like an unbiased opinion about it is super important. Because if you have to make that like isolated decision, you might not make the best one because you're getting inundated with all of these lies.
Right. And I think it's something as like, the guy, John, that reached out to me, right? Like that was a person there's like a backing. There's probably like an army of people behind him all doing it. And they're collecting this money to, $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 at a time. And it's so crazy. And then you also on the other side of it too, have the people be like, can't make your payroll tomorrow. We'll fast track you the money. And it's like the payday advance things too. And it's like, this is almost like a payday advance on like steroids, but like both are terrible. And if you can't make the decision with a clear head because everything's going on, not having people to gut check you would be like, Ashley, that's a terrible idea. Or this is like, you have to consider this. Like, what does this mean? What would it mean when you have other investors that you're talking to? Like, why would you take some money like this? And I think the international thing is interesting because, that to me was the first big red flag, especially after the Dubai, the UAE situation from a couple years ago. But you keep hearing, right? Now people being like, hey, all of these foreign entities are making investment into the US, legitimate, right? And like, the government is working with the Saudis and now there's all these funds and they're doing it across the board. And so you're like, not terrible. They could want to, I don't think the Saudi wealth fund wants to invest in higher innovation. Seems crazy, but like they're investing random place. So you also are hearing enough about international investment, but I think you have to take a step back and say like, I'm not the US government that the sovereign wealth fund wants something out of. I'm a founder in Austin, Texas, creating personal portable air purification devices. Why would they? It has to make sense. It's like they wouldn't make sense for them to want to do that necessarily. And so I think that's another piece of it from the international standpoint that we are hearing so much on the international front with investments into the US, but it's like the government or like massive US organization, the scale,
right?
Not
what's their minimum
small
check
businesses.
size? Right, because sometimes with those bigger funds internationally, their minimum check size is very large, right? Because they're not doing 100,000 or 500,000. And so that's the thing you have to like say, okay, well, if Dubai is or UAE is investing, their minimum size for their wealth fund is probably $1 million or $2 million. And that wouldn't make sense for where you are in your company from an equity or even debt standpoint, right? Like the valuation and what their check size, or some of the check sizes, I think minimums are 10 million, right? Like they don't play below a certain level.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think it's like all of those factors are going into it, right? Like you have just like your day to day, I got to get it done. I got to get the money however I need. I got to get the customers and the revenue, run my ads and buy my inventory. And then you're like, you have all these outside noises. And so I think what my biggest thing that I was so grateful for was just like having the wherewithal to like give it a lot of Googles, but then most of all, like talk to people and just be like, hey, this is the conversation. This is a real person. Even like my brother, he's like, he works in finance. He was like, was it like a real person on the video call? I was like, it was a real person on the video call. Like, I promise you, we asked specific enough questions. It was a real person. And that's what was crazy. And so I think you just have to ask, like to avoid it. It's like answer the email, but also like ask 7,000 questions and talk to an outside person
gut check yourself
with someone in the financial sector in some capacity. I don't care if it's an accountant, a wealth manager, or someone in private equity, it doesn't matter. I think just having that advisor that you can talk to be like, you could go down a really, really bad hole. Focus on this, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. And so the way I looked at it with your situation is why risk $5,000, right?
Right.
And so just because it had so many of the flags of the other scams, right? I had never heard of a startup scam. And I think you're right. I think we'll start hearing more about it, which is why I appreciate you coming on the show to talk about it, because no one wants to get on and say, I was almost a victim of a scam. A lot of people don't want to talk about it because I think there is this unnecessary, in my opinion, attitude of, well, I'm smart, it won't happen to me. And it's like, no. That might have been the case when they used to call you and say, oh, Ashley, you're a princess. I don't know if you know this, but we have a castle here in your name. Just send us 10,000 and we're going to give you a castle here. Your long lost cousin in whatever country has this castle. So yeah, those scams back in the day, yes, people fell for them. They were a lot more far-fetched, but nowadays, as you were saying, they're predatory. They're preying on people because they figured out enough information. They're real people. That's the wild thing to me, right? Like the fact that the person in the picture was the person you talked to on a video call, wasn't AI. And so I think that's like the main point, is that they're incredibly sophisticated. And I do really think anyone can fall prey, especially if they're making isolated decisions in a pressure cooker. And the pressure cooker was unnecessarily created by the scam artist. But if you're not gut checking and going to a group of people that you trust to get other opinions and you're making an isolated decision, it's easy to fall prey to what they're telling you because you're fact checking it and it's online and it's matching what they're telling you.
Right. And I think now it's like, okay, well, how do you prevent it moving forward? So that's why I was like happy to talk about it, because I'm like, other people, this guy's probably reaching out to everybody in the sun. I think I've maybe unlocked, since we've been having our conversation of like how they're finding the people. Cause that was like, how am I being targeted for this? Like, that they would know that I'm under it, just the specific pieces where I think now it's like, okay, well, how do you try to help people not fall for it, see the flags and recognize it? But then also it's like, okay, we know personal and in large business, all those types of scams that you've mentioned. But now it's like, okay, we'll have to bring light to it because it's a huge problem and we can't have that happen at all. So I was just like,
we'll definitely put this on LinkedIn because it feels like they kind of creep on LinkedIn the most.
Yeah. I mean, that is my spidey sense is it's LinkedIn and Twitter, because that's where you get, and I love a Paul Graham. I think he's like great on Twitter. He posts a lot of good insights, but at the same time, there's a lot of startups interacting with him who are pitch me your ideas and all of these things. And then you're just open for public. They know what your company is, how much you're fundraising. All of that is so public in a feels like a one-to-one conversation on LinkedIn or on a Twitter. And at the end of the day, you're just giving them the information. And I don't know how you reconcile that when I do know that people have gotten funding from Twitter, from people and interactions and DMs they've had on Twitter by sharing that information. But you're also opening yourself up to a liability of being people connecting you. Yeah. And getting on people's radar about it. So I think, like a LinkedIn, I think people have to beware. And like, you think you're smart enough to have it not happen to you. But I think what's good, and I think how I'm proud of the approach that we had, was like, we were smart enough to ask the questions and say no, and say, it feels too fishy. Maybe we could have gotten it, without having a couple of the emails back and forth. But, I'd rather be safe than sorry on something like that.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you sharing. So for all of our listeners who are starting a business, beware, they are also targeting, because a lot of people think it won't happen to me. And the amount of financial scams that we're seeing have, even just personally with my regular business, my day-to-day business, and just in conversations, have increased dramatically. So I feel like I'm going to borrow this from the Reading Rainbow, but the more you know, the better you can protect yourself. So the Reading Rainbow.
Yeah, you got to do the Reading Rainbow on it.
That's it, right? So the more you know, I think the more you're educated about like what the components of scams are. So there's usually an international component. They're asking you to send money to get money. That's always off. And then they create a false sense of urgency. And this didn't happen in your case, but they often want to try to isolate you so that they can get you to make a decision in a vacuum. And then there'll be some other little small ones, but those are three main themes to watch out for in any of the scams that are all similar. And so if it's meeting any of those red flags, then I think, as you said, the most important thing to do is just talk to people who you trust, who are in the industry, whether it's an accountant, a CFP, a private equity person, an investment banker, anyone you have access to gut check and say, what would you do? Like, what questions would you ask? Or what do you think about this situation?
Agreed.
So Ashley, where can they find your business, our listeners?
Yes. So they can find us at higherinnovation.com. And then we also sell our product, the Hot Box, on walmart.com as well as bestbuy.com.
Amazing. And for all of our lovely listeners, you can find our most up-to-date information on Instagram at Future Rich Podcast or on our website, www.futurerichpodcast.com. Time for our disclaimer. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance references are historical and do not guarantee future results. Make sure that you consult with your own legal, tax, and/or financial advisor before making any decisions.